The rec room was loud, the way prison rec rooms always are. Voices bouncing off concrete walls, the clang of weights being dropped, the shuffle of cards, the low hum of men trying to fill time with anything that made the hours pass faster. Mike Tyson sat at a table in the corner, alone, staring at nothing in particular. He had been in Indiana Youth Center for 8 months. 8 months of the same walls, the same routine, the same faces, and 8 months of trying to figure out who he was when boxing was taken away. He wasn't the youngest heavyweight champion anymore, wasn't the baddest man on the planet, wasn't the guy who made arenas go silent just by stepping into the ring. He was inmate number 922335, a man in a jumpsuit, a name on a roster, and every day, sitting in that cell, or walking the yard, or eating in the cafeteria, he felt the absence of the thing that had defined him since he was a kid. The ring, the fights, the power. Without it, he didn't know what he was. Most of the other inmates gave him space, not out of respect exactly, more like caution. They knew who he was, what he had been, and even though he was locked up just like them, even though he had been stripped of his titles and his freedom and his identity, there was still something in the way he moved, the way he sat, the way his eyes tracked people across a room. Something that said, "I'm still dangerous. Don't test me." But there's always someone, always one guy who doesn't read the room, who mistakes quiet for weakness, who sees a man sitting alone and thinks, "This is my chance to make a name." His name was Carter, mid-30s, tall, lean, doing time for armed robbery. He wasn't particularly tough, wasn't particularly smart, but he had a mouth. And in prison, sometimes a mouth is all you need to get attention, to establish yourself, to prove you're not nobody. Carter had been watching Tyson for weeks, making little comments under his breath when Tyson walked past. Nothing direct, nothing that required a response, just enough to let other people hear, just enough to plant a seed. "Big man don't look so big in here. Wonder how tough he is without his gloves." Little jabs, testing, seeing how far he could push before something happened. And Tyson had ignored it, all of it, not because he was afraid, not because he didn't hear, but because engaging meant giving Carter what he wanted: attention, acknowledgement. And Tyson had learned, in the 8 months he'd been locked up, that the easiest way to make a problem go away was to act like it didn't exist. But Carter was getting bolder. And on this particular afternoon, in the rec room with 30 other inmates scattered around playing cards and lifting weights and killing time, Carter decided to stop testing and start declaring. He walked over to Tyson's table, stood there for a moment. Tyson didn't look up, didn't acknowledge him, just kept staring at the table in front of him. "You know what I think?" Carter said, loud enough that the guys at the next table could hear, loud enough that a few heads turned. Tyson didn't respond. "I think you're nothing without boxing," Carter continued. His voice was getting louder, more confident. "Out there, you were somebody. In here, you're just another convict, just like the rest of us. Nothing special." The room was starting to go quiet, not all at once, but in waves. The guys at the next table stopped playing cards. The guys by the weights stopped lifting. People were turning, watching. Because this was the kind of thing that didn't happen often. Someone directly challenging Mike Tyson, and everyone wanted to see how it would play out. Tyson still didn't move, didn't look up. His hands were resting on the table in front of him. Relaxed, open, his breathing was steady, his face was blank. Carter took the silence as weakness, as confirmation. He leaned down slightly, got closer, spoke louder. You hear me? You're nothing. Without that ring, without those 4 seconds. That's how long it took for everything to change. Tyson's head turned, slowly, deliberately. He looked up at Carter, and the expression on Tyson's face wasn't anger, wasn't rage. It was something colder, something more controlled. His eyes locked onto Carter's, and in that moment, everyone in the rec room who was watching felt it. The shift, the temperature drop. Tyson didn't stand, didn't raise his voice, didn't make a threat. He just looked at Carter. And in that look, in those 4 seconds of absolute stillness, Carter saw something that made his mouth stop working, made his breath catch, made his body, which had been leaning forward confidently just moments ago, instinctively lean back. Tyson's eyes weren't empty. They were full, full of every fight he'd ever been in, every opponent he'd ever broken, every moment of violence he'd ever controlled and released at will. And Carter, standing there under that gaze, understood something that no amount of bravado could overcome, that Mike Tyson, in a prison jumpsuit, was still Mike Tyson, that the ring hadn't made him dangerous. It had just given him a place to put it, and without the ring, all that danger was still there, just compressed, contained, waiting. Carter took a step back, not a big step, just a small adjustment, a repositioning of his weight. But everyone saw it. The guys at the card table, the guys by the weights, the guards standing by the door. They all saw Carter's body language change from aggressive to defensive in the span of a breath. Tyson didn't say a word, didn't need to. He just held Carter's eyes for one more second, and then he looked away, back down at the table, like Carter had ceased to exist, like he wasn't worth the energy it would take to respond. And that dismissal, that complete and total lack of acknowledgement, was more devastating than any punch could have been, because it said, "You're not even worth my time. You're not a threat. You're not interesting. You're just noise." The rec room stayed quiet. Carter stood there for another moment, frozen, unsure what to do. His mouth opened like he was going to say something else, but nothing came out. And after a few seconds that felt like minutes, he turned and walked away, back to his table, back to his corner. And the guys he'd been trying to impress didn't look at him, didn't acknowledge him, because what had just happened wasn't a victory for anyone. It was just a reminder, a clarification. Mike Tyson was still Mike Tyson. The noise in the rec room slowly started to come back. Cards being shuffled, weights being lifted, conversations resuming. But it was different now, quieter, more careful, because everyone had just been reminded of something they'd known intellectually but hadn't felt viscerally until that moment, that taking away a man's freedom doesn't take away who he is, that a cage doesn't change the animal inside it. Tyson sat at his table for the rest of rec time, alone, undisturbed, and when the guards called time and everyone filed out to go back to their cells, the other inmates gave him space, not because they were ordered to, but because they understood. Carter had tested the waters, had pushed to see if Mike Tyson, stripped of his titles and his platform and his identity, was still someone to fear. And in 4 seconds, without a word, without a movement beyond a look, Tyson had answered. Back in his cell that night, Tyson lay on his bunk and stared at the ceiling. The fluorescent lights in the hallway cast a pale glow through the bars. The sounds of the cell block, coughing, shuffling, the occasional shout, filtered through the concrete. And Tyson thought about what Carter had said. "You're nothing without boxing." Part of him wanted to believe it wasn't true, wanted to believe that he was more than just a fighter, that his identity existed beyond the ring and the titles and the ability to hurt people. But sitting in that cell, month after month, day after day, he couldn't escape the truth. Without boxing, he didn't know who he was, didn't know what he was for. The ring had given him purpose, structure, a place where his anger and his pain and his power made sense. And without it, all of that was still inside him, just directionless, contained. But Carter had been wrong about one thing. Tyson wasn't nothing. He was still dangerous, still someone people instinctively stepped back from, still someone whose gaze could change the energy in a room. Boxing hadn't made him that. It had just channeled it, given it a target, a set of rules, a context where violence was acceptable, expected, celebrated. In prison, there were no rules, no referees, no bell to save you. And that made Tyson, in some ways, more dangerous than he'd ever been in a ring. Because in the ring, there were limits, lines he couldn't cross. But here, in this place where those lines didn't exist, the only thing keeping him from crossing them was his own restraint, his own choice to not engage, to not unleash the thing that lived inside him and had lived there long before he ever put on a pair of gloves. Carter had wanted a reaction, had wanted Tyson to prove he was still tough, still relevant. But Tyson had given him something worse. He'd given him awareness, the awareness that some men don't need to prove anything, that their presence alone is proof, and that challenging them isn't bravery, it's stupidity. 4 seconds. That's all it had taken. 4 seconds of Tyson looking at Carter. And in those 4 seconds, the entire cell block had gone silent. Not because something violent had happened, but because everyone had felt, collectively, the potential for violence. The understanding that they were one decision away from seeing what Mike Tyson looked like when all the control and restraint and discipline were removed. And nobody wanted to see that. Not really. The days after that incident were quieter. Carter didn't make any more comments, didn't even look in Tyson's direction. The other inmates gave Tyson even more space than before, and the guards who had watched the whole thing unfold made a note in their reports. No physical altercation, no violation of rules. But something had happened, something that reminded everyone that Mike Tyson, even in a cell, even stripped of everything that had made him famous, was still someone you didn't provoke. Tyson spent the next 3 years in that prison, 3 years of routine and silence, and the slow, grinding process of figuring out who he was when the thing that had defined him was taken away. He read books. He converted to Islam. He trained his body even though there was no fight to train for. And he thought a lot about his life, about the choices he'd made, about what came next. And when he finally walked out of Indiana Youth Center in 1995, when he stepped back into the world as a free man, he wasn't the same person who had walked in. The anger was still there. The power was still there. But something else had been added. An awareness, an understanding that boxing had given him a place to put his violence, but it hadn't made him who he was. That person, the one who could silence a room with a look, who could make grown men step back without lifting a hand, had always existed, and would always exist, with or without the ring. Carter's words had been meant as an insult, a challenge, a way to diminish Tyson and elevate himself. But in a strange way, they had given Tyson something. They had forced him to confront the question of who he was without boxing. And the answer, revealed in those 4 seconds of silence, was clear. He was still Mike Tyson, still dangerous, still someone people feared, not because of what he could do in a ring, but because of what he was. And that thing, that presence, that controlled violence, that willingness to unleash hell, if pushed far enough, didn't need gloves or a referee or a championship belt to exist. It just was. And everyone in that cell block, especially Carter, learned that lesson. You can take away a man's freedom. You can take away his career. You can strip him of his titles and his identity and everything he thought made him who he was, but you can't take away the essence of what he is. And if that essence is dangerous, if it's powerful, if it's something that makes people instinctively step back, then no cage in the world is going to change that. Mike Tyson was in prison when an inmate said he was nothing without boxing. And 4 seconds later, without a word, without a punch, without any physical demonstration of power, Tyson proved him wrong, not by fighting, by simply being. And the entire cell block went silent, because they understood. They all understood. Mike Tyson without boxing was still Mike Tyson, and that was more than enough. You've been in a version of that room. Maybe not a prison rec room. Maybe not surrounded by inmates and concrete walls. But you've been somewhere where someone decided to test you, to challenge you, to say something designed to diminish you, to make you prove yourself. Maybe it was at work. Someone questioning your competence in front of others, saying you're only valuable because of your position, or your connections, or some external thing that could be taken away, trying to make you react, trying to make you defend yourself. Maybe it was in a relationship, someone saying you're nothing without them, that your worth is tied to their validation, that if they left, you'd be lost, trying to make you feel small, trying to make you prove you need them. Maybe it was just in a moment, a stranger, a comment, something designed to get under your skin and make you respond emotionally, make you prove you're still relevant, still tough, still worth acknowledging. And you had a choice in that moment, the same choice Tyson had. You could engage, you could fight back, you could prove, with words or actions or aggression, that you're not what they said you were, that you're still powerful, still dangerous, still someone who matters. Or you could do what Tyson did. You could look at them, hold their gaze, let them see who you are without saying a word, and then dismiss them, not with anger, not with violence, just with the understanding that they're not worth your energy, that their words don't define you, that your presence, your essence, is proof enough. The second option is harder, because it requires restraint. It requires being so certain of who you are that you don't need to prove it. Being so comfortable with your power that you don't need to demonstrate it. And most people can't do that. Most people need the validation, need the fight, need to show that they're still relevant. But the people who can do it, the ones who can sit in silence while being challenged, who can look someone in the eye and make them step back without lifting a hand, those are the people who understand something fundamental about power. That real power doesn't need to announce itself, doesn't need to prove itself. It just is. Mike Tyson sat in a prison rec room and was told he was nothing without boxing. And instead of fighting, instead of arguing, instead of proving anything, he just looked at the man who said it for 4 seconds. And in those 4 seconds, that man and everyone watching understood that they had made a mistake, that Mike Tyson was exactly who he had always been, with or without the ring. You've been tested. You'll be tested again. And when it happens, you'll have to decide. Are you going to prove yourself to someone who doesn't matter? Or are you going to trust that who you are is evident in how you carry yourself, in how you respond or don't respond when provoked? Tyson chose silence, and the silence was louder than any punch could have been, because it said, "I don't need to prove anything to you. My existence is proof enough." And the entire cell block understood. 4 seconds, no words, no violence, just presence. And that was all it took.